Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People on the Move, a podcast brought to you by Cargomatic. I'm your host, Tyler Kern. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the program. Now, today on the show, we wanted to stop and take a look at how the industry is relating to LGBT personnel. Obviously, June is Pride Month, and so we thought this would be a good opportunity to learn a little bit more about the current state of the industry as it relates to issues surrounding the LGBT community, how they're treated, and the current state of things right now in the trucking industry. And so I'm thrilled and really pleased to be able to welcome on the program today Shelle Lichti. She's the founder and executive director of LGBT Truckers. Shelle, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having us. I'm super excited to participate.
Absolutely. Well, we are absolutely thrilled to have you on here today, Shelle, and to learn a little bit more from your perspective. And so, first and foremost, just give us the lay of the land of the industry right now. Give us the current state of the industry and tell us a little bit about how it compares now to the previous years that you've been around in the trucking industry.
Well, currently the temperature as far as the driver market, from what I'm seeing and my observations and interactions out on the roads and, with other conversations with drivers in general, including the LGBT and our allies, as well as just drivers in general, our market is in constant fluctuation. Right now, the temperature, a lot of us are really scared and intimidated by our current market. The freight prices being, so low, the shortages, all the way down to, truck maintenance and repairs, fuel expenses, insurance rates going through the roof, claims going through the roof, the regulations. It's a very uncomfortable status right now. It's very topsy-turvy. The uncertainty is there, even though as a driver, we know that we are a demand in the workplace. Without us, nothing goes. But at the same time, as fuel prices are going up, our value seems to be going down when it comes to the corporate acknowledgement of what we do for their businesses. So therefore, the potential for raises, our incentives, bonuses, all of those things are being whittled away because of the increase of fuel prices, for instance, which is encouraging turnover because there's not as much focus being put on retention, which that in itself is a self-perpetuating thing, that a lot of companies and mega carriers talk about a driver shortage. If you're not able to reinvest in the value of your workforce, that workforce is going to exit. And then you're going to be dealing with less qualified people to do the same job.
Absolutely. I think that's some fantastic context for the rest of our conversation here today. So Shelle, tell us a little bit more about your own personal experiences in the industry and what led you to begin and to start LGBT Truckers.
I'd like to say that the industry raised me. I've got a very, bizarre entry stories as far as I came into the industry as a runaway, hitchhiking with truck drivers, and taught myself as a mode to protect myself from some of the movements that drivers back in the day would make. I also had to learn through observation. Being a woman in the industry, I felt that I could not ask questions. So I had to watch and utilize logic to teach myself a lot. But the industry raised me. It gave me an outlet to not only escape my, the environment that I needed to leave from, but it opened up the opportunity for me to work on myself while out on the road and get paid to do it. And then, being LGBTQ, it was also, for me, it was probably a little bit easier because it was back in the day a given. If it was a woman solo out on the road, most likely she was a lesbian. Now, there was interactions that would happen, comments that were made by my male counterparts. And back in the day, regardless of sexuality, well, for the women, from that angle, a lot of companies did not want to hire women drivers. I had one company in specific that told me that their ideal driver was a single white male veteran. They didn't have anybody to go home to. They didn't need to go home. They could just stay rolling, and they knew how to follow orders. So that stereotype of that, a lot of us out here, both being LGBT and a woman in the industry, we broke a lot of grounds from those who, my predecessors before me, to me entering into the industry. And since then, the culture of the industry has slowly shifted. Do we still have room for growth? Yes. In all diversity inclusion levels, there is still a big need. From all of those marginalized people, but with my focus being on the LGBTQ community, because we've been around since the evolution of the wheel. Whether people want to acknowledge it or not, our input is still of value, and we are doing the same job. But like women in the industry, we fall victim through discriminatory behaviors and actions, and literally physical actions of others. Trucking has been the last bastion for a lot of discriminatory behaviors. The stuff that we see out here currently would not be tolerated in any other mainstream workforce. So, after a dear friend of mine was brutally attacked at a truck stop years ago, we were talking about the need to create a little bit of a cocoon of supportive environment and how we would go about that. And the internet was still a relatively young thing. Social media was still very in its infancy. But back then, thankfully, cell phones had evolved. So we utilized an 800 conference line that was available 24/7 for anybody to participate in, whether you were LGBT, a family member with questions, or just somebody who wanted to, be a mentor and to let you know that you weren't alone. And that evolved from that loss. How do we prevent other drivers from dying, either at their hands or somebody else's? And that's still relevant today as suicide rates in the transportation industry is increasing.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to bring up, and I'm glad you did. And you mentioned marginalized communities and marginalized groups of people, and I wonder how the industry can maybe cast more of a light to these marginalized communities, shine more of a light on them, so that they're visible and the kind of support can be provided that they're going to need. What can be done at an institutional level to begin to make that happen?
Not vilifying, individuals within your workforce or demeaning their value and what they're saying. If an employee comes to you as a truck driver stating that they're in fear because somebody is threatening them on social media, through your portal, even through your company's portal, on social media, they're threatening you. Don't just pat them on the head and placate and be like, oh, you know what, we'll talk to them. No, that is a movement where HR needs to be contacted and apprised of what's going on, and actions need to be taken immediately. Instead of just kind of minimizing, we understand that, anytime people, especially as drivers, we run our mouths. We got a lot of pent up stuff going on. So I understand on a corporate level, they can't take everything super serious, but by taking certain reports as a grain of salt, you are minimizing the crisis that driver feels that they're in, and that fear factor. So by identifying that and saying, you know what, I'm sorry this happened. Let me, I'm aware of it now. So let me see what I can do to intervene. And all the way to, if it becomes more necessary, then actual actions need to be taken care of. Once a driver is in a position at a terminal, for instance, that they're terrified to get out of their truck because they're going to be beaten. This person has threatened to beat or kill them. That is now a time that, the company needs to not placate, but go ahead and terminate. Because if they are making verbal threats, what's next? Because granted, it's probably very hard on an HR department of large companies to give the attention necessary to each and every report. And a lot of stuff goes unreported. That's the biggest thing, is we feel that we're nitpicking or we're spotlighting ourselves and becoming a problem child. Nobody wants to be that problem child, but at the same time, how much should you ingest before that overflows in other ways, through anxiety, through workplace PTSD, through the mental health aspect, how much is too much? That's a hard gauge to determine for the individual.
Shelley, one of the things that has struck me over the last couple of years, due to a lot of events that we've seen in the news and different things like that, has been that there's a stark difference between just saying I'm not a discriminatory person and truly being an ally. We've seen it in the Black Lives Matter movement and things along those lines, that it's one thing to say I'm simply not racist, and it's another thing entirely to truly be an ally for a group of people. And so what does that look like, and what can that look like in the industry to truly be an ally for the LGBT community?
In my opinion, the common quote of "see something, say something." If you see an interaction taking place that is harmful or insulting or anything in that arena, don't just stand by. Say something, even if it's to walk up to the individual that's being spoken to. Fake that connection. Hey, how you doing? And help remove that person from that situation. That is a form of advocacy, because you were standing up for that person and removing them from that hostile encounter. You don't have to be, wear ally on your forehead per se, but standing up, it means a lot to our community, because sometimes we feel so overwhelmed with the constant battle of either hiding who we are or tolerating some of the comments and stuff that's made, being followed around a truck stop, the intimidation from shippers or receivers. When you see something, say something. Hey, you know what, dude? That's what you just said to that driver. That's just not right. Or just because you don't like your dispatcher doesn't mean she's a dyke. That kind of stuff. That's a great way to step in, at the same time diffuse.
Right. That's a really great point. That's something that we hear a lot of. See something, say something. I'm sure all of us can think of instances where we've heard that before, but we so rarely, put that into actual practice. So I think that's a really great thing to bring up. Tell us a little bit more about how the industry can really be welcoming in an authentic way to people from the LGBT community. What does that look like?
One of the things that actually really annoys me when I interact with a lot of carriers and mega carriers, when we are approaching, the recruitment of marginalized or LGBTQ communities, is they're fond of that PC, protect themselves of, we'll hire anybody who's qualified. Well, saying it in that context, you are already marginalizing your workforce. You're
Right.
relegating them to a thing instead of somebody who can contribute to your growth. So, yes, you may want to hire qualified drivers, but how about saying, you know what, we welcome all diversity and communities, instead of we'll hire anybody who's qualified. It
Mm.
just sounds better. Sometimes the wording can be a little intimidating, but it's hard for the industry to break their status quo molds. It's worked before, so why won't it work now? We need to get more companies to crack that door of open-mindedness in how they approach different demographics. That I think that encompasses it right there. Like opening the door and looking at how we approach the demographics.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because if you look hard enough, you can find examples of the competency question being raised for certain groups of people, but not for others. And I think a lot of us can think of examples like that, where that question is going to come up for certain people, but it's an assumed thing for others. Yeah, go ahead.
One
Yeah.
of the things, that is also relevant is when you have like a trans person in your workforce, as a driver, per se, you as a dispatcher, that you are going to be building an intimate relationship with a driver. You become the mediator between them and the company, as well as the main connection. You are the face of the company, that person that they are in contact with more often, rather than forgetting. Because a lot of companies, you are a truck number, and we get it. It's frustrating, but when I call you and you pull up my truck number, there may be that person's dead name, and they need to include their adjusted name, their new birth name.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is offensive to a trans person that they've told you over and over, can you please call me this? Or, if I identify as a he, how can I help you, ma'am? That gets offensive, to a lot of drivers, or vice versa. I hear this from the trans community, that they get frustrated, that they've reiterated over and over gently, and sometimes a little forcefully, to their dispatchers. It's sir, not, it's,
Mm-hmm.
they, that's little identifying movements can go a long way.
So, Shelley, what are some ways, we've talked about quite a few of them kind of throughout this conversation, but what are some ways that you can see that the industry can continue to improve in this area for the LGBT community?
Validation
Mm-hmm.
of the individual. I think we need, as an industry as a whole, to quit looking at your workforce as assets, and remember that this is people behind the wheel, people who have lives, people who are in evolution. We're people, put the human back in humanity. It's looking at we talk about, again, I'll go back to the driver shortage. Granted, we all have our personal views on it. Everybody knows mine is, that it's self-perpetuated. But when looking at different demographics to recruit from, why are we not looking at the LGBTQ community? And because they are starting to realize that this is an economic opportunity for them to explore.
Mm-hmm.
We are not targeting that demographic. We target women in recruiting. We target through advertising to the other marginalized individuals, as far as, Black, Hispanic, Asian, all of those other demographics. Why are we not looking at this huge pool of possible, help to aid and relieve some of the stressors in our industry?
That's a great point, and that's an area where it feels like there's so much untapped potential that could certainly be improved upon. So I think that's a really great point, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So Shelley, before we wrap things up, tell us a little bit more about LGBT truckers, where people can get involved and even support if they're interested in learning more and in supporting your cause.
LGBT Truckers is the first and largest organization targeting the transportation industry, specifically the trucking communities, from mechanics down to the drivers. Anybody and everybody, of course, is welcome, as well as our allies. It started off as a support forum for the truck drivers, their families, and allies. We have moved on to, of course, utilizing social media. We grow off of participation. And when people participate with the organization in any facet, whether it's, commenting on posts or taking a more active role in our community, they are also being the voice for those who are not comfortable yet to step out. We like to call them our wallflowers. They watch what we're doing. They probably almost triple what our number actually is, because they can't even comment or like a post, for instance, because the way that social media is set up is Jim Bob over here liked this post. Then they get a comment from a friend. Hey, I didn't know you were, you affiliated with the queers, so that makes them stand off and not participate. So when you, as a supporter or of the community, does participate, people are watching. You are also being a voice for others. We are a non-for-profit organization, like I said, with our 501c3 status. We also utilize an amazing tool. We have the Rainbow Rider, which is the first Pride awareness truck in the country. Fully Pride theme wrap truck. And we, on multiple levels for the organization, we accept donations through our website. You can or catch us at events and make donations or purchases. For the Rainbow Rider, there is a program set up for that because we are currently trying to acquire the Rainbow Rider. You can only have the first once. And this is everybody's truck. And we are actually even doing a collage on the back. Because this is everybody's truck, I want them to be a part of it. So you can get a flag and put whatever message you want on it and be a part of the truck. It represents you. Be a part of it. And that's the main message for everything involving LGBT truckers is this is you. Be a part of it. Help take the lead in change. The road to inclusion is not a one-way street.
Did you give us the website to LGBT truckers? Can you give us that?
No, I did not. It is lgbttruckers.org.
Awesome. There you go. There is the website. That is how you get in touch. Shelle Lichti, founder and executive director of LGBT Truckers. Shelle, thank you so much again. It's just been an absolute pleasure and an honor getting a chance to discuss these things with you today. So thank you so much for joining the show.
It was great speaking with you too.
Absolutely. And everyone out there, thank you for tuning into another episode of People on the Move, a podcast brought to you by Cargomatic. Of course, for more, you can get in touch with the folks at Cargomatic. Go to cargomatic.com and you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can find more episodes by visiting cargomatic.com. And stay tuned. We'll be back soon with more episodes of the show. But for Shelle Lichti, I'm Tyler Kern. We'll talk to you again soon.